understand that until I had been a psychologist probably for at least 15 years, a professor. Now, I did my PhD in a more biological area, and then I was a personality psychologist, and it doesn't have the same kind of bias. But then I started looking into the literature on authoritarian personality and authoritarianism, and all I found was this insistence that there was no such thing as left-wing authoritarianism. And I thought, what the hell is this? How can we possibly assume as a science, social psychology, which is not much of a science as far as I'm concerned, by the way, but how can we state so bluntly that there's no such thing as left-wing authoritarianism? And the authoritarian scale that had been used by social psychologists was only right-wing authoritarianism. And I thought, well, what about the communists? I mean, did nobody notice in social psychology that there were communist dictators? What were those people? Well, and then it's worse than that. That's bad enough.
The President of the United States, the leaders of Britain and other leaders are calling on you to step down, to leave Libya, to leave your position of power. Will you do that?
So I don't think that anything has been updated on this, on the end of investigation into left-wing authoritarianism. And it's too bad, because it isn't exactly obvious to me that when the left goes wrong, it goes wrong exactly the same way the right goes wrong when it goes wrong. So I think the right might have more of a proclivity to clump together in a unitary fashion, partly because I think it's easier to do that on the right. If it's true that those on the right are more conscientious and dutiful and lower in openness, that means they're not as diverse in their opinions and range of interests, let's say. And so in principle, it would be easier to unite them. And that might be an advantage. There's an advantage to rapid unification, just like there's an advantage to diversity of ideation, which covers more territory but is slower and harder to organize. So, and the fact that the research isn't balanced to investigate both ends means, well, that we're ignorant about these things when we shouldn't be.
Yes, and we should be studying it, and we should be studying the impact or the relationship of social media, particularly to both left-wing and right-wing authoritarianism, in our online groups and online tribes. Over time, those who are more fanatical or those who are more dogmatic in their views come to dominate the discussion, and they intimidate the moderates in the group. And the effect that has is, over time, it pulls the moderates over to the more extreme pole of the group, or the more extreme pole of the ideology that is held.
It's not that easy if you're a bully, let's say, ideologically committed to bully, to actually find people and bully them. But online you can do that because it's so efficient. You can do that extremely quickly and with very many people, and you can unite. That's the other thing, is you can unite fanatics, even if they're rare statistically. So, in a small town, maybe you could find 2 fanatics, and what the hell are they going to do? But online, well, then there's a group. And then that would also mean that the fanatics are more likely to overestimate how popular their ideas actually are, because there's a biased sampling issue, for example, we'll say.
But also fanatics can attract quite large followings on social media, and particularly if they focus on one issue. So a very, very effective strategy for being an activist on social media, using social media as one of your main or your main tool of engagement, is to just pick one issue and focus on it and just repeat it over and over and over again. And that is, I'm not saying all activism is bad by any means, but it can create a community that can become fanatical, basically, which is a danger.
I'm not so sure that activism isn't just bad
altogether.
Obviously the idea that you need to pay attention to your institutions and that sometimes they need criticism and reform. It's like, obviously, institutions ossify. and they become corrupt, and everyone has to be alert to that. And there are steps you can and should take and are morally obligated, I think, to take.
Yes.
But the thing about activism is that it's almost always predicated on the idea that you're right, you're morally superior, and you've identified the people who are wrong. And to me, that's one step away from mob, and it's one step away from punishment. And one of the things that appalls me and makes me ashamed in relationship to the universities is that universities are pretty good at teaching young people that being an activist is a good thing. And I'm not so sure at all that it's a good thing. I think it's pseudo responsibility, especially because it always comes with the easy identification of just who the enemy is.